Marco Codes! Today we're going to talk about JDBC nice and easy. It doesn't matter if you're using a framework like Spring or Hibernate, APA, whatever have you. In the end, you're always going to be using JDBC. So let's learn some basics. As always, I prepared a tiny Maven project for this video. You'll find the link to the sources in the references. Inside the project, you'll have just one class, JDBC tutorial class, with the main method. We're going to spend most of the time in this video inside the main method. Now, we want to connect to a database, which means two things. We need a database, first of all. And second, we need a JDBC driver for that database. So driver classes which let any Java program access a database. The question is, what database should we actually use for this video? I could go with Postgres, MySQL, Oracle, whatever have you. The thing is, you'd have to have it installed on your machine. Now, Docker would kind of alleviate the pain, but then you would have to have Docker installed to boot up a machine. So I'm just going to make it very simple for this video. We're going to use a database which is called H2. It's a Java database. It's an embedded database, so to speak. What does that mean? I'll show you in a second, but first of all, we'll need to add the H2 dependency to our project. So either with your favorite Maven search engine or the coordinates in the references, add a dependency, search for H2, and then you'll find com.h2 database. You'll just add it to the project. Right. In the latest version, the specific version doesn't actually really matter. The beauty of it is that this jar file that you're pulling down includes a database. It also includes a JDBC driver, so there's not multiple dependencies. It's all in one, essentially. And you don't have to have anything installed for this to work. You just need to add the jar file to your project. Now, if you wanted to connect to MySQL, to Oracle, Postgres, whatever have you, then you'll find the specific drivers that you'll need in the references as always. You'll find a nice list inside the references to Vlad's homepage, who writes great articles about Hibernate, JDBC, everything that, and he has a list of all the JDBC drivers you would ever want. Now, enough with that setup stuff. We want to go back to the JDBC tutorial class. Connect to our database. There's two ways of doing that. The first way is what I'm going to use here now is just I would use it for smaller, shorter scripts. I wouldn't use it in, production environments, really in big server programs. For that, there's another way, which we're going to have a look at in a bit. But for now, we're going to start with the DriverManager way. So we're just going to call DriverManager get connection. Please, DriverManager, give me a connection to my database. And what you're going to do is you're going to extract a connection here. And then what you also could do is, by the way, is actually let's surround it with a try-catch block. That means that the database connection gets opened up inside here, and it also gets closed automatically. Very important. Get the connection handling right. And then, no, I don't want to refactor. I just want to add my SQL exception here. I'm just going to print it out. Nothing that we have to do here. So get connection. As you can see, multiple parameters. You need to put in a URL, more specifically a JDBC URL. You could also put in the URL plus a username plus a password here if your database had username passwords, which we don't have at the moment. So we can focus on the JDBC URL. Now, in the JDBC world, they always start with JDBC : always. Then comes the database type. So for example, H2 or MySQL or Postgres or what have you here. I'm just going to go with H2. : and then comes a database specific connection string. So there could be the IP address, whatever have you to your database. Or in the case of H2, I'm just going to go with mem:. Now, what the hell does mem: mean and how would I find out about that? Very simple. We just go to H2's website. Right, so here we are, H2 database engine cheat sheet on the H2 database website. You'll find a section called database URLs. And what I want you to do is I want you to become comfortable with reading the vendor's database homepages. H2 database homepage, MySQL homepage. You'll need to do that. You can't just, spoon feed all that information into someone. So database URL, in-memory database. Here it says, well, you could use JDBC : H2 mem test if you want to have an in-memory database, which is called test. You could want multiple in-memory databases. So that's why you might want to use different names here. If you just want to have one in-memory database with no name, which we want to do here, then they tell you, well, just write JDBC H2 mem : here. This specific string only works for the H2 database. If you try, you cannot connect with that string against MySQL, whatever. You'll have to read up in the MySQL documentation what connection string you should be using. Now, if you don't want to use H2 only in pure in-memory mode, which means it doesn't save any files to the file system, to your hard drive, then you might want to use one of these URLs up here. Embedded means, please H2 database, save your files to my home folder inside a test subfolder. You could also boot up an H2 database in server mode where it runs with the IP address, whatever have you. But for now, we're going to be fine with the pure in-memory mode. Which means we can go back here and actually let's see one thing. Connection, we're just going to call connection is valid. This here is valid once a timeout parameter, which you can set to 0, which means wait endlessly till the database tells you, yes, the connection is valid. But as it's an in-memory database and as there aren't any network troubles, whatever, we actually expect there not to be any timeouts at all. So we're just going to go with 0. And we're just going to run this now. And as you can see, the connection is valid, 0 equals true. We actually have already a database opened up and we could connect to it. How does it work again? Because you might have been wondering, hey, where did the database get connected? It's simple. Whenever in the H2 world, you call get connection on a DriverManager with that specific URL, H2's JDBC driver will make sure to open up the database if it doesn't exist yet, which it doesn't here at the moment. And then it just lives as long as essentially this main method is running, and then the database is gone afterwards. So that's the simplest, easiest way to get started with databases in the Java world. All right, let's write some SQL statements. Actually, before that, we have a database now, but we don't have any database tables or records. We need to change that. And what I actually did is on the source main resources, I have a SQL file, users.sql. Now get out your SQL skills. There's 4 lines inside. Let's just quickly go through them. Create table if not exists users with a column ID, an auto-incrementing identity column, and the name varchar column, which should not be null or must not be null. So this creates a database table if it doesn't yet exist. Here we're going to truncate the table. So we're going to delete every record, and then we're just inserting 2 users into the table, Marco and Lisa. So whenever we execute these 4 SQL statements, we essentially have an empty database table, not an empty one. We have a database table users with 2 records, Marco and Lisa. Now the question is, how and when do we execute that SQL file? If you're already used to something like Spring Boot, for example, you know that Spring Boot offers you the option to have these sort of SQL files like Schema SQL, put them somewhere on the source main resources, and Spring Boot will automatically execute them independent of your database whenever you boot up Spring Boot. Then you have libraries like Flyway, Liquibase, whatever, that allow you to have also these SQL files and make schema changes to the database whenever you boot up your application. And then there's also the way of, and that brings us a bit back to the JDBC URLs, some databases like H2 have the option to automatically, natively run SQL files whenever you try to access an H2 database. Again, this is just an exercise to get you back onto the H2 website to read up about the features, all the features it offers. And then the shortcut solution is you come back here and see what I'm going to paste in here now. Because what I'm going to paste in here is an advanced option, whatever have you. You have a semicolon, which essentially, by the way, just separates your usual connection string from all these additional options. There's an init option that I'm putting here. On init, so whenever we open up the connection to the database, H2 should run the script from class path users.sql. Now, the thing is, class path users.sql means source main resources users.sql. So every time we get that connection now, it means these 4 SQL statements get executed. Let's try that and let's actually see if this runs. So we're just going to go ahead and run this. Yes, that seemed to work. There was no error. Actually, let's make it a different way. Let's just put something inside here, make it invalid SQL. Yes, now we're getting an exception. saying that IDs des entity is basically not valid. So this essentially worked, which means our users table got created and we can finally start writing some SQL statements. Okay, we're gonna make it very simple. We're programming boring software, CRUD software, create, read, update, delete, which translates nicely to a couple of SQL statements, selects, for example, inserts, updates, and deletes, right? And we just want to start with select for now. When you have an open database connection in the Java world, what you want to do is you want to call connection prepare statement. It lets you prepare, precompile a SQL statement. That statement should look like this. Select star from users, for example, if we wanted to select some users, where name equals Marco. No, don't do that. And this is just one thing, never ever do that. What you want to do is you want to work with placeholders. That's why they're called prepared statements. They're being prepared with placeholders inside. And you want to protect against SQL injection, meaning that if you just did string concatenation, put something in the user, for example, on your website on some field put inside, starts dropping some tables, whatever, executing updates, you don't want that. You want to use placeholders, and all the JDBC drivers protect against SQL injection, right? So we have our prepared statement here. Let's actually call it a PS, prepare statement from users where name equals question mark. We need to set that whenever we execute that statement now, we need to set obviously the name parameter. We can do that by calling PS set. There's different methods here depending on what type of object you're actually putting inside. What type of object you're putting inside. Well, that didn't make sense, did it? So set string if you have a string parameter, for example, like we have here. Or set int if you had an int parameter, set something, set array, whatever have you. Also set object if your JDBC driver supports it, and for example, you had some sort of a date, right? And then some date time here in that case. And then you could, use set object, and that would also kind of work. But for now, we're just going to go with set string. They start with 1, not with 0. And we're just going to put Marco inside. That's it. And then comes the time where we want to, or not ps.select, we want to do an execute query. We want to just run that query. And by the way, we can reuse the prepare statement 20 million times, so to speak. You could, call clear parameters, reset new parameters, and just, execute that prepared statement over and over and over again. You just prepare it once and then you rerun it many, many times. Result set. How do we get the data? How do we get the records now out of the result set? Well, the API is a bit low level, and I'm going to show you many different ways of accessing a database in a much nicer way at the end of this video. But for now, we're going to go with while result set next. That's how you iterate through all the rows that came back. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to print out result set. Nope, not as a string. We're just going to go result set get. Again, you need to know what columns you're getting, what database type they have. So for example, get int for my ID column. Plus, let's make a plus here, plus result set, get string, and then the name. It's a bit fumbly, right? But let's see if it works. We're just going to run it. And hopefully we can see, yes, the select statement worked. We got user Marco back from the database. We could also, search for Lisa, whatever have you. You can play around with that. It's just the way you execute select statements. Right, we have selects, which brings us to inserts. We're just I like copy and pasting. So we're just gonna go insert PS. It's our insert prepared statement. Same thing, get your SQL skills out, insert into users. And we just want to insert something into the name column because ID is auto-generated. Again, values placeholder. We're just gonna insert the user John, let's say here. And then we're going to go with insert PS execute update. Now, two things. The insert count is called execute update, even though we're inserting. It's the same method for inserts, deletes, updates, so don't worry about that. Execute update gives you back the number of rows that were, for example, inserted, updated, or changed in any way, deleted in that case. So what we actually want to do is we want to print out the insert count because if we execute that statement, we would expect the insert count to be 1, right? Let's try it out. Let's just, run it here. And as you can see, yay, a new row got inserted. If you don't believe me, you can, as an exercise, rerun, the select statement from up here, down there, and see all the rows, and you'll see the row John has been inserted. Now, the same thing for updates. Copy and paste, don't you like it? So we're going to do the poor man's version. We're going to change insert to update. So the update PS, update users, right? Set name equals not a string placeholder, where name equals another placeholder. Yeah, set name equals placeholder where name equals placeholder. We're going to do set string John. We want to set the name to Johnny, where name has been John, right? We're going to execute the update, again, the update count, right? And we're just going to print that out. Let's see if this works. We're just going to run it and we can see, yay. So the row got inserted. It also got updated because one row has been updated. Yeah. And we're going to do the same thing for delete. So again, copy and paste coding, update. We're going to replace update with delete inside here. We need to fix our statement, delete from users, where name equals question mark. Now we want to delete user Johnny. Again, we're just going to run it and see what happens here. Yay, we're getting one row got deleted down here as well. So everything we did actually is working as expected. And by the way, this already tells you have a database connection. That's all you need to do. You open it up once. You can prepare statements, set parameters on these statements, and then just fire off your select statements, insert statements, update statements, delete statements. That's essentially all there is to it. Now, obviously, that's not all there is to it. You have the topic of database transactions, for example, database transaction handling. Also more, not advanced features, but stuff like batch statements, for example. There's a ton of stuff with the plain basic JDBC API that I tried to write an article about it. You'll find the link in the references to read up more about, at least on transactions, because that's a topic that you'll encounter sooner or later as well. But for now, we're just happy with having these CRUD statements working. And I want to show you something else. I want to show you, I promised it at the very beginning, to show you the second way of connecting to databases, and the way you would find in all the modern frameworks, for example, Spring Boot, you wouldn't use the DriverManager.get connection. Instead, you would use a data source. Now, what does that mean? So let's put a data source here. Data source equals something. For now, it equals null. And a data source essentially is a tiny interface, and data source gives you connections to a database. So instead of asking the DriverManager.connection, what you would do is you would ask the data source, hey, data source, please give me a connection. We could, let's see, add a new method here, create data source, something like that. And then in here, we need to figure out what type of data source to create. Now, every JDBC driver comes with their own data source, MySQL data source, and whatever have you. But in most production systems, you will use a connection pool. Connection pool also has a data source. Problem is, what is a connection pool? Well, simple. The thing is, opening up database connections is rather expensive. When I say expensive, I mean tens of milliseconds to open up a database connection. And you don't essentially want to do that for every single SQL statement you send to a database. Instead, you want to keep these connections open as long as possible. You want to have a pool of 10, 20 connections, whatever have you. And when someone asks you, the connection pool, hey, please give me a database connection, you just give them a connection that has already been pre-initialized. But you don't create them on the spot, new ones for every SQL statement, but just having a tiny pool of connections lying around. Now, in the Java world, there's plenty of different choices of popular connection pool libraries. I'm going to make it very simple. I'm going to show you the one you should be using. It's called Hikari Connection Pool. Default in many libraries, many frameworks like Spring Boot, HikariCP. So you go to your POM.xml file. Again, use your favorite Maven search engine, and you want to search for HikariCP. Now, there's a couple of things. HikariCP, if you do this, I think it's called Pascal case, where uppercase every word. HikariCP 501 is the latest one that you should add at the time of the recording of this video. There's also the older driver versions, which are basically Hikari all in lowercase -cp. You don't want to do that. You just want to go with the HikariCP camel casing here, so to speak. Here is the connection pool, which means we can go back to our create data source method, and we now need to figure out how do we create an Hikari connection pool data source. What a long sentence. Funny fact is, I don't know. Again, I want you to read the documentation. That means we need to go to HikariCP's website. Right, so here we go. Here's the GitHub page for the project HikariCP. When you scroll down a bit more, you can see the Maven coordinates that we just entered. And if you scroll down even more, somewhere you see the options that you can set here, blah, blah, blah. We don't want all this stuff. What we want, yes, you can use the config class like so. Either do it like this here, or directly instantiate a Hikari data source like so. We're going to go the easy way and do it like so. So I'm just going to copy this here. I'm going to put it in here, Hikari data source, right? The JDBC URL is thankfully going to be the same URL, like so. We don't need username password for now, return data source, and that's it. So now what actually happens is the Hikari data source will create, I think by default, 10 connections to a database when you start the program, and then data source get connection here will just return you one of these connections. There won't be a completely new connection being spawned for just executing those statements. Let's try it out and see if everything is still working or if we made a mistake. Nope, we ran the program. We got an error message saying that, logging libraries weren't set up perfectly. But again, you can see the connection was valid. And I got, my user back, Marco, from the first select query. And then we had the other 3 queries, insert, update, delete, and everything essentially is working as expected. And just to wrap this up, in Spring Boot speak, for example, I'm always referencing that as one of the most popular Java frameworks. You essentially, put in JDBC H2 or whatever have you inside your application properties file. And under the hood, a new Hikari data source is being created for you and is being used across your whole Spring project. And that you can inject into different, DAO repository classes and whatnot. But all these advanced libraries and frameworks build upon these very simple, basic building blocks. Which brings us almost to the end of this video. In the Java world, there's a gazillion options of how to access your database. You might already know that, that you've got the more object-oriented way. You've got JPA/Hibernate. On the other hand, you have libraries like Juke, for example, which are more database-centric. I summed up all the libraries and whatever have you in an article, which I'm linking down below. But the thing is, each one of these libraries uses JDBC under the hood. There's no way around it. And you need to understand those basics before you get into all the other libraries. And then you can find out after a while, depending on the company and the company culture, whatever have you, do you want to be more SQL specific? Do you want to be more object-centric with your database mapping options, so to speak? In the end, it takes time. It takes years and years of practice to understand all of these database libraries in the Java world. I guess that's about it for today. Thanks for watching and sayonara.